But for now, we can forget all that and just come into our seat. And so I encourage you to really find your solid, comfortable seat. So you might move around a little bit, shrug the shoulders. Take a few deep breaths. And feel just the immediate energy of being here in a room full of people. So you feel the energy of others and the space, and then also whatever you bring here tonight, this energetic body, physical body, mental body, emotional body, all these various layers of experience that we have here. And Sishan, we're not trying to curate a particular experience necessarily. Really, we're just trying to be where we are in full acceptance of what's here. And then we work from there. Feeling a deep sense of grounding, so the support beneath you and this body. In this body, there's the breath, the simple breath. See if you can make your breath as natural and as relaxed as possible, which basically just means getting out of the way of the natural process of the breath. So we relax the mechanism and the surrounding tissues of the breath, the shoulders and the rib cage, the belly, back body. Really getting this kind of 360 sort of experience of the breath, front, back, sides, also up and down. And at any point include a long breath. That's how the body integrates. There's nothing you have to do about the thoughts. Just allow them to be. Stay with the breath. As the breath becomes more familiar, perhaps it begins to expand. As we're aware of the whole of the body, taking this awareness with the breath, almost like the breath is moving through the body, intermingling with any tension or just the physicality of the body. And the breath as an energetic experience can even begin to intermingle with thought, emotion, breaking up stuckness. Perhaps you start to expand and explore the space around the body, within the room. Breath is space, awareness, life. The air element itself. checking in here, reminder to relax. Maybe a nice long breath would be helpful. Breathing space into the body, mind. And for the last few minutes of our meditation together, just bringing, if you'd like, bringing some attention to the heart. And sending kindness throughout this body. Kindness to this mind and the thoughts that are running through the mind and the emotions and our psychology. Even this ego that gets us in trouble. It can be difficult sometimes. Loving it. And as we become familiar with and look at this challenge it is to be human, we can radiate that kindness out through this understanding, perhaps to just the people in this room, but really all beings have this challenge of being human or animal. Sending kindness out in general or to someone or a group of people in particular. If you don't have the capacity for that, just stay with you. And then once again, feeling this body on the ground, seat, breath. connection with the earth. For those of you on Zoom, I'm ringing the bell. All right. Thank you all so much. And let's take a little break. Feel free to grab some tea or some water or a bio break. Um, yeah, be back in about 5 minutes. We'll ring a bell when there's about a minute left. Yeah, thank you. All right. Welcome, everyone. That was a long 5 minutes, and mostly because of me. So, but I appreciate that you're here. My name's Adam. If we haven't met before, um, and yeah, I just want to offer some Dharma reflections tonight. So, what I'd like to talk about tonight is something that may be a little, I don't know if esoteric's the right word, but it's something that in Buddhism we talk about often, and at the center it's sort of brought up a lot. Um, so, I wanted to talk about the relative and the absolute. You all heard of these two terms before? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I want to talk about it because sometimes there can be sort of some confusion around it, and I just wanted to give my view. Um, and there can tend to be a sort of hierarchy between the two, like one's better than the other. Uh, yeah. So my approach is always very practical. So I just want to talk about how what it means to live in awareness with both a relative view and an absolute view. And they're really two dimensions of truth that aren't in conflict at all. There's really like this dynamic relationship between them. So I want to look at some of the early Buddhist teachings and some of the Mahayana teachings. And there's this incredible teacher named Nagarjuna who lived in the second or third century. I can never remember. And he was really brilliant at talking about these two truths, as were the Thai forest masters. So as well. And they're really, though they can seem esoteric or abstract, they're really not. They're very practical, and I see them as both as invitations to being more free. First, I think it's really important to just consider the world that the Buddha came up in, was born into. world at the time of the Buddha, 2,600 years ago, wasn't an easy time to live. It tends to be kind of glorified as like this, especially if you look at art of the Buddhist time. It's very utopian and very much like a paradise. But life was hard. You know, most people who were born under the rule of somebody, um, and their lives were mostly concerned with surviving, just surviving, and uh, and so it wasn't an easy time to live. So a lot of the spiritual practices at the time were really much more about transcendence, like how to get out of this body, how to get out of this world that is so difficult to be in. And so a lot of the practices were very much about ascetic practices that look to kind of tame the desires of the body in order to transcend above it. And the Buddha was very radical because he brought everybody back to their body. Um, and it's very interesting when you read the words of the Buddha. He was very centered around bringing people back to their body. Most of the practices are about the body, about the breath, about uh, the first foundation of mindfulness is the body, and there's several practices within that scope of the body. Most of the practices, by far, are within the body, and this is again, it's very radical at the time. There's this teacher Ajahn Sucitto who I really love, and he's kind of transformed the way I look at practice and look at uh, at these teachings. And he always says one phrase that he used in a retreat that really hit me was he said, "All streams of experience flow through this body. All streams of experience flow through this body." And so we want to wake this body up as much as possible. So it's not about the necessarily about the mind. It's more about this here now. Because this body, this breath is always present. It's always here. And so we continuously come back. We continuously come back. And the Buddha tried to transcend. That's what his practice was all about. Um, his early life was a curated life by his father, who was trying to protect him from seeing what reality really looked like. And so his early life was very much around sensuality and pleasure and not seeing what was really there. And then when the Buddha left the palace, he saw what was really there. The first things he saw were sickness and death and aging and a spiritual practitioner. So he went into the forest and he started to study with various teachers. And there were two teachers in particular that he studied with. I'm forgetting their names right now, but these teachers, what they taught were these really refined higher states of consciousness. And so, if you're familiar with the jhana practices, which are various stages of absorption on the path, various stages of concentration on the path, he was practicing the seventh and the eighth jhana, which are these very high teachings. Um, and the first teacher he studied with, that's accounted for in the suttas, taught him the seventh jhana, and the seventh jhana is a state of is the realm of nothingness or void. And the Buddha was very gifted in reaching these various states of consciousness. And he was so good, in fact, that the teacher asked him to be his teacher because he was able to master that realm of consciousness so easily. And so the Buddha said no, because what he was looking for was the end of suffering. So he reached this very high state of consciousness, this very subtle state of consciousness. But when he came out of it, when he came away from like the sort of the transcendence of it and came back to the body, there was still suffering here. There was still suffering. It didn't fix that part. So then he went and studied with another teacher who taught the eighth jhana, which the eighth jhana is, is neither perception, called neither perception nor non-perception. A very, very, very refined state where there's no grasping at something and there's not grasping at nothing. But even here in this state, there was still a self, and when he came back, there was still suffering. And so you can get to these various states of consciousness. Buddha was singularly concerned with the end of suffering. He often said, I teach two things, or sometimes he said one thing, suffering and the end of suffering. That's what he taught. And reaching these states didn't do that. It could lay the ground for that later, those states in and of themselves. And so what we're seeking in our practice is not a state. It's not some state of consciousness where everything disappears and becomes better. It's really this continuous returning to here, what's here right now. And so this month, the theme for Mountain Stream is the middle way, which is what the Buddha was pointing towards. And we can sometimes think of the middle way as sort of this non-position between two extremes. But really, what the middle way is all about is how to hold paradox, how to hold things that are seemingly opposite together at the same time. So the Buddha is often asked these sort of extreme questions of like, is there a self? Is there not a self? Is the world eternal? Is the world not eternal? And he would never answer this question. And so never answer this question because to answer that question would be to affirm duality that just created more suffering. So he was always concerned with how can we hold both and undermine the whole premise of the question in the first place. And so this is where we come to this relative and the absolute truths. And so in early Buddhism, there's this term called sammuti satcha, and sammuti satcha just means conventional or relative truth. And so this is the world of distinctions. This is the world of self and other, of good and bad, of karma and cause and effect. So it's basically the conventional world, the relative world, is basically ruled by karma. Karma just means action. And action means, in this sense, the words I choose right now, the actions I choose right now, how I choose to live my life will bear fruit in some way. I'm always creating the conditions right now for what will come into fruition in the future. So I'm constantly creating conditions, conditioning the future. So this relative world is the world that we're in. This is the relative world. It's the material world. It's where there's distinctions between me and you and everything else. And so the Buddha really emphasized ethics here, the ethics of non-harming, not ethics in a moralistic sense where we're trying to be like good boys and girls, not like a Christian ethic, more like an ethic of understanding of karma and how harm it does the opposite of creating the conditions for awakening. So how do we create the conditions for awakening? How do we create the conditions for awakening in ourselves and in others? And this is what the Buddhist ethic is all about. Um, so if I'm out there creating a bunch of harm for myself, I can't reach the states of calm within my own mind that would allow for awakening to happen. And we can talk about what awakening is at some point. And then if I'm out there creating harm, that's not creating the conditions for others to awaken either, because they fear me, or every time I'm in their presence, then that doesn't create calmness around me that is conducive for this idea of awakening. So all of our practice, no matter what it is, I don't care if it's watching the breath or some, you know, uh, whatever practice you think, they're all in the relative world, all relative. Point to something that's beyond the relative, but they're all in the relative world. They're practices that we do. Buddha was very clear about this. All dharmas are empty. All practices are empty. More to say about that a little bit later. So practicing in the relative world is again creating the conditions for awakening to happen, for alignment with the awake state or the non-dual state. And then within the Buddhist teachings, we have the Eightfold Path, and the first step in the Eightfold Path is called right view. Right view, and right view is this understanding of the Four Noble Truths and of karma specifically. And the Buddha talked about two levels of right view. Hope this isn't too much for you all, but there's two levels of the right view. So there's a mundane right view that includes the understanding of karma and ethics, causality. And then there's something called the supra-mundane right view. And this is what penetrates the Four Noble Truths. Uh, and when I say penetrating the Four Noble Truths, it's an embodiment of the understanding of the Four Noble Truths. And we think of the Four Noble Truths, it was the Buddha's first teaching, as being this very basic thing, but it's actually extremely complex. Um, and all pervasive. In fact, the Buddha called it the elephant's footprint, Four Noble Truths. And he was saying all other animals' footprints can fit within the elephant's footprint. So all other things, all other aspects of the Dharma could fit within the Four Noble Truths. Yeah, all the Dharmas. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's Zen or Tibetan or whatever thing. All of it can fit within the Four Noble Truths. And so this deep understanding of suffering, as the first noble truth, the second noble truth being the clinging to the self or clinging to a false sense of self is what creates the suffering. And all the many ways that we do that on a very subtle level, on a small level, and on a really gross level. And the more we look, the more we get deeper we go in meditation, the more we start to see these little subtle clingings that we do that are creating a sense of self all the time, and how we're identifying with things all the time. And whenever we identify with something, we're creating a self, and that self is causing suffering. That's the idea behind truths. So it penetrates really deeply. The Dhammapada, which is like this really beautiful book. It's like little pithy sayings of the Buddha. It says to avoid all evil, and evil there it just means unskillfulness or um, leading away from awakening. It's not a judgmental view. To avoid all unskillfulness, to cultivate the skillful, to purify the mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. And so, me speaking from direct experience, I used to kind of think that um, if I could just reach a particular state, then everything would just kind of take care of itself. Like if I got to this particular place, then ethics and all those other boring things would just it wouldn't matter anymore. And you can have a lot of awakening and still be a really terrible person. And we see evidence of that all over the place. There's lots of awakened people out there and don't create the conditions conducive for awakening for their students or the people around them. This Padmasambhava is the man who brought Buddhism from India to Tibet, so known as Guru Rinpoche. And incredible, incredible teacher. He brought Dzogchen. You ever see his like statues of him? His eyes are always like really wide, like this, like so wide, because he's awake. He's awake. And it said he said this. He says, "Though my view is as vast as the sky, my attention to karma or ethics is as fine as grains of barley flour." Absolute and relative, right there. Though my view is as vast as the sky, my attention to karma is as fine as grains of barley flour. And so, as practitioners, we walk with humility. We care. We bow. We clean up after ourselves. We serve. And this is the very ground of practice. This is the ground of practice. So that's the relative. So then there's what's called the Paramatta Satya, which is ultimate truth. And in this view, there are no fixed selves. There's no fixed self. There's no solid thing. There's no lasting identity. The body, the mind, and all phenomena arise and pass away. All phenomena, all materiality is dependently originated, or it's another way of saying that is that it's empty, empty of any inherent existence. That everything is dependent on something else. Nothing exists on its own. Everything is dependent upon something else. The Buddha said, "Who sees the Dhamma sees me. Who sees me sees the Dhamma." And what he's pointing to there is, as this kind of enlightened being, uh, he uh, was empty, empty of himself, and that's kind of what he was pointing to. Because the Dhamma is not a person; it's a it's the act of seeing into the impermanent, um, into the insubstantiality of materiality. It's the nature of reality. And so Dhamma, in its oldest definition, just means nature. It means the way things are, or the natural law, um, like gravity is a natural law. It's just the way things are. Um, and so when the Buddha talked about Dhamma, the nature of Dhamma is empty. There's no inherent existence in anything. Everything is dependent. Dependent. And Nagarjuna, who's again one of the, if not the greatest Buddhist teacher, philosopher, practitioner ever, he wrote this book called The Root Verses of the Middle Way, and so he was the founder of what's called the Madhyamaka school. And he says the Buddhist teaching of the Dharma is based on two truths: a truth of worldly convention and an ultimate truth. Without relying on the conventional truth, the ultimate cannot be taught. Without understanding the ultimate, liberation is not attained. And then later he says, those who do not understand the distinction between these two truths do not understand the profound reality in the Buddhist teaching. So it's not one or the other. It's not ultimate or conventional. It's both together. And really, when you look at this, it's just two aspects of the same reality. There's no difference between conventional and ultimate. And I can talk about that a little bit later. So there are two ways of seeing. So the eyes we see through, conventional reality and ultimate reality. There are two different sets of eyes that are seeing one unified reality. And so one sees the pattern, and the other view sees the fabric. One view sees the dance, the other view sees the space within which the dance is happening. Ajahn Chah said, "Do not be attached to the teachings. Do not be attached to the practices. Do not be attached to non-attachment." So even within this, with now you might find your brain like trying to choose and understand. And really it kind of comes back to this, what Ajahn Chah said, is just to kind of let go of it all, you know? That this middle space of the middle way is just like a holding of the paradox, and allowing the truth to just kind of be there because we're right in the middle of it. Ajahn Amar puts it this way. He says, uh, relative truth without ultimate truth is blind. Ultimate truth without relative truth is empty. The dance is in their inseparability. And so we're constantly moving between the two. Again, we bow, we chant, we sit. And in Zen words, we chop wood, we carry water. And none of these things are obstacles to awakening. They, they are awakening. They are awakening. We practice in the world of form while realizing its emptiness. So everything we do is an expression of that. And when everything we do is an expression of the ultimate, then the ultimate becomes more real. And the interweaving of the two helps us to live more skillfully in the world while also realizing the ultimate truth. From the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. I think sometimes we get caught up in that form is emptiness part and then we forget the rest of it. Emptiness is also form. And so every act that we undertake is a form of practice and holds both of these truths. So even the Dharma itself is a raft, the Buddha reminds us. The Dhamma is like a raft for crossing over, not for holding on to. So this is, again, referring to this idea of all dharmas being empty. They're practical. They're relative. They help us get to a certain place, and then we let go of it, and we go to something else. What's appropriate for right now? So some practical things. How do we live this? And I'll wrap up here so I can answer some questions. So first thing is just daily life practice. And one thing I started in Zen, and one thing I really love about Zen is well, let me back up a little bit. One thing about Zen that's really interesting when you read the stories about the enlightenment stories of Zen people who've awakened, they're always doing something. It's never happening when they're sitting in meditation. Always like chopping down a tree or carrying water somewhere or making food or slipping or something. It's always something like that. And so Zen I started in Zen and it was very much about not necessarily the sitting, though you did sit like long, excruciating hours. It was really difficult. But really the emphasis was even stronger in the spaces in between the sitting and the walking and the eating and the washing up and the interactions and the relationality. It was always those things were really emphasized because that's where we lose our awareness. Those are the places that we lose our awareness. And so everything we do, I always bring up washing the dishes because that's been a big struggle for me over the years, but it's actually become this like really beautiful practice for me where I just, I wash the dish and I see how clean it is, and it feels really good, after you clean something and it's there, and there's this, you know, joy, this awakening that can happen there. And so this daily life practice is, what are the mundane things we do that we are so resistant to? Because it's in that resistance is the awakening. That's where the awakening is. In that thing that we don't want to do, waiting in line, somewhere, or whatever it is, where that resistance is, that's where the awakening lies. And so we're getting these pointers all day long to go past, or to bring together this relative and this absolute. Yeah. And so in the daily life practice, it's an awareness that honors and sees that there's no division between the sacred and the mundane. The mundane can be very sacred. So as I said, washing the dishes, answering an email, grieving a loss, they're all moments on the path that can lead to waking up, that are doorways into the awakening. Meditation is cultivation and realization. It's another practical thing we can do. An actual meditation practice is very important. And we sit not to bypass life, because some people would think that we're kind of checking out when we sit. But it's really, about seeing life more clearly. So the sitting practice creates the conditions to see more clearly, to be more aware out there in the world. And so our samadhi practice, it's usually samadhi, shamatha practice, they're usually translated as concentration. I don't really like that word. Uh, you can think of samadhi practice as a gathering of attention, a coming together with all the disparate aspects of ourselves, and bringing them into one place. Shamatha translates as a calm abiding in an object. And so what this involves is, the breath or some type of object, of just settling the mind upon that object and then gathering yourself around it, which stabilizes and creates calm in the mind. So that calm is required for vipassana, which vipassana translated as insight or to see into. John Travis likes to say, to see into the subtle. And so the calm is required, and the insight sees into the subtle, which really sees into the nature of all things. It's this direct connection with the universal aspects of our experience. And so within the insight practice, this is where we see that all is in flux. All is not self. All is luminous. It's awake. And so all of the various things work together. So that's another way the relative and the absolute come together. Because awareness doesn't go anywhere. It's like we don't lose it and then we have to go catch it. Like it's always here. It's our mind that's going other places. So we have to bring our mind back. So there's an alignment with awareness itself. And so we think we're going other places, but we're actually not. We're just kind of lost in the mind. And so we just come back. And the third thing is ethical action. When we see into the nature, when we see into the ultimate, then we don't withdraw, we engage. There's an engagement there. Because when you see into emptiness, you see that all things are interconnected. And the only intelligent response when you realize interconnection is compassion. The only intelligent response. Really, that's the only response. Um, So I'll wrap this up. The Buddha talked about that everything we experience is a dream. It's this world is a dream. But we don't ignore the dream. We live it fully with love and with wisdom. The scene into the ultimate, this balance of the conventional, the relative, and the ultimate. It's not the end of the path, it's the beginning of loving without condition. And so we see into the unconditioned, and then our love becomes unconditional. So let's just pause for a moment here. May we bow to the relative, trust in the absolute, and live from a place where there's no distinction. No path, no arrival, just this step right here, right now. Thank you for your attention. I know that was a little dense, but I just wanted to address it because it's something that kind of comes up quite often. And don't feel like, if you got like one sentence from it, that's enough. uh, uh, yeah. So just trust that you can just let it go, and that what uh, needs to be there will stay. So yeah, don't feel like you have to get it all. It's not gettable. Yeah, so we'll just open this up for some discussion if anybody has any questions. Or if you have insight or a reflection, doesn't have to be a question. And online, you can just raise your hand, physical hand, or if you go down to reactions, I think there's a raise hand. Yeah, there's a raise hand button there.
This is Jen coming from the meditation hall. I'm going to start here passing the microphone.
Cool.
Start with your name and hold it close.
I'm Priscilla, and I just want to thank you for tackling this. I think just the whole concept of relative and absolute just triggers my dualistic mind, and this, um, talk has kind of dissolved that
Hmm.
quite a bit, and so I'm really grateful for it, and I would always love to hear more about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Priscilla.
Is there anybody online? Because we have more people in the hall.
I don't see anybody
Okay, great.
online raising their hand.
Start with your name and hold it close.
Hello, I'm Marielena. Thank you
Hi.
for the talk. It was
Thank you.
pretty phenomenal. And
Thank you.
um, what comes to my awareness is that I guess is what you're discussing kind of similar to the idea of choiceless awareness. So kind of when we're confronted with situations in life, and what's been mostly on my radar lately is witnessing things like people protesting the Israel and Palestine, and then people getting riled up about politics and Trump, or even things kind of more down in history, like imperialism and colonialism against the indigenous, would would the Buddha or would Buddhism in those cases as well just be neutral and surrendered, or would there ever be a relative time for defense or action? Um, I always feel like the Buddha would just be neutral and allow karma to do its thing, but a lot of people in the spiritual path have different kind of perspectives about that, and they'll quote like Jesus and flipping over the tables in the synagogue, and sometimes you have to have righteous anger. So just curious what your perspective is about that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's important. Yeah. So I think this piece of understanding, like from a social justice point of view, and Buddhism, I feel like again the Buddha was very concerned about creating the conditions for awakening, and if those conditions weren't there, how to uh, create them there. So there are several instances in the life of the Buddha where he did intervene. So his actually his people, the Sakyas, they were kind of at war with this other clan several times, and the Buddha intervened 3 times, and it worked twice, and the third time his people were slaughtered. So there's another instance where there was these villages fighting over water rights, and the Buddha intervened, and so there are several places where the even the Four Noble Truths itself, that word noble was very controversial at the time because the word noble was reserved for those in the higher castes. And so he used the word noble as it's not about nobility, it's not about how you were born, it's about how you live your life. That's what makes you noble. So he tried to dismantle the caste system, and so he was very active in that way. Um, so I don't see him as neutral. I see him as, you know, he very much was about non-harm. But I would never call the Buddha a pacifist. Yeah. And I think pacifism sometimes it passes the buck to somebody else so that they take the responsibility. And I don't think that's the most ethical thing all the time. So yeah, I mean, there's this kind of this funny story that Menindra, who was Joseph Goldstein's teacher, Sharon Salzberg's teacher, John Travis's teacher, and there was this instance where Sharon Salzberg was riding a rickshaw to go see him, and on the way she was mugged, and she didn't know what to do. And so she went to Menindra and said, you know, what should I do if I'm in that situation again? And he said, with all the compassion of your heart, beat the man with your umbrella. So it's like sometimes compassion it's fierce. Um, Sometimes it's forgiving. It just takes any form that it needs to create the balance and the justice. So um, yeah, it's a constant question, but I think when it comes to up to standing up for the oppressed and creating conditions for the awakening of others, I think it's pretty clear of how the Buddha would say. So he wasn't passive, I don't think. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we're moving the microphone into the hall again because I don't see anybody online, right?
I don't
Okay,
see anybody, no.
thank you.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Adam. Thank you so much for this great, comprehensive embrace tonight. What I would like to share and ask you for your insight here are two practical observations. One is that it seems to me that in order to hold um, the ultimate truth together with the dance of the world, of samsara, of appearance, a certain amount of wakeness or awake part of the mind is needed. So without that, I don't see it happening. And I was impressed to see that in this tripod, 3 legs of Buddhist practice, the ethical part, the moral part, the mindfulness that you approach, and the insight. It seems to me right now, after 1.5 years of interacting, with Buddhist circles, that the weakest leg is insight. Like what I don't see, and I ask myself why. What I don't see in our culture is wisdom or insight. Yes, we do see it, but what seems to be hard for all of us, no matter which culture we are coming from, is that in a world where things are being presented in black and white or this after that sequential mode, and what am I trying to say? But there is no place for the sacred at all. So we are already coming program like that. It is very hard to operate in a multi-processor way, like basically holding this and that together at the same time, true and alive. And it's very easy, I'm going to finish with that, to overlook the main premise that you were ending with tonight in the beautiful teaching tonight about the fact that we are dreaming, we are experiencing a dream. And what I hear most of the time about provisional teachings, about, like you said, I'm not sure that Dogen, for example's teaching of practice enlightenment, it's a provisional thing. I'm not sure about that. But what I do hear often and it's very hard for me as how to say sudden awakening approach, person or student or whatever. It's very hard to see, and I'm asking myself, where is the bridge? Where is the practical way to see the dream, to know that I am in delusion as my mind works by default, and have the necessary honesty to realize there ain't no insight at this moment, instead of assuming assuming that insight is already here. So what I see, I live in a world when both in myself and outside, 95% I can say, or 90% of the things that I hear, experience inside me or others, it's complete lack of insight. So this thing with insight is very precious, very rare, and it probably falls from the sky, but it needs to be recognized and cultivated. So my question to you tonight would be about the connection between insight and wisdom and holding both truth. And I was impressed, very, very impressed by Ajahn Chah, that he kept emphasizing in some talks that I read recently, that without insight as a stabilizer, mindfulness just comes and goes. It's just not going to stay. So thank you so much.
When you mean insight, do you mean like vipassana, or are you meaning
Wisdom.
wisdom? Okay.
They are probably in some way for me interchangeable. So what I'm trying to say, being blind and just doing practices does not
Right.
bring
Yes.
eyesight. And it's basically, we are in the situation of Diogenes 2,300 years ago, walking in daylight with a lamp and staring at people, for him to look for an honest man. But my guess is also for people to finally, the ones who are not totally blind, to see that there is some light that is moving there. So what I'm trying to say is the honest recognition of lack of insight seems to me to be the prerequisite for cultivating it, not assuming that it's there, and how to do that. That's what I'm asking. And it seems to me that Ajahn Chah was very, very practically emphasizing this wisdom. He called it wisdom as the stabilizer for all the rest. So we are not walking through the world blind, but we try to learn to see.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the main insight that the Buddha was trying to point to was the insubstantiality of things and the coming and going and the impermanence of all things. And I think that was like the very central teaching. And the deepening of that understanding leads to wisdom. but there does need to be a stabilization of like the samadhi or the shamatha I was talking about before. Um, yeah, I'm not exactly sure where to go with your question, but I feel like um, I really trust in the unfoldment of the Dharma, and if you create the conditions for it, that it will unfold naturally on its own, and it will point out your own ignorance constantly. If you like have the faith and allow it to do so. So that's my personal experience with it. But I don't know if that gets to what you're saying at all. Yeah, we can have a further conversation about it.
Do we have time for one more?
It's 34, but if it's quick. Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
My name's Turiya.
Hi.
Towards the end of your talk, as I recall, you mentioned, you said something like everything's in flux. And so at about that moment, I came away with the feeling of, or the questioning or the wondering, is there actually, there's luminosity in impermanence.
Hmm.
That's all I wanted to say.
Hmm.
But I'm sort of walking out of here with that wondering
Hmm.
and that attending to that. Is there luminosity in impermanence?
Hmm.
And I would say yes.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so let's just close real quick. I'll do a quickie here. Just pausing here, feeling the body, feeling ground, the breath. Perhaps a sense of mudita, which is sympathetic joy, just the joy that we feel when we gather together as a community or as people that are curious about, at least a little bit curious about waking up, seeing what this life's all about. It's a really beautiful thing. May the merit of our and the fruits of our insight lead to more awakening ourselves and others. And may this be shared with all beings, with everyone we encounter. And may all beings in all directions, without exception, be free from suffering and the conditions of suffering. May all beings awaken. Thank you all so much.